First, let's start with why you have to write a news article in the first place. Unless you plan on becoming a journalist, this might seem like a pretty random writing skill to be tested on. But there may be more to this task than it seems. The skills EQAO is trying to measure on this part of the test are your ability to brainstorm ideas based off of only a few pieces of information, how well you can organize your ideas into short, concise paragraphs, your ability to write in the same tone as a journalist, and your knowledge of punctuation rules. Don't forget that newspaper articles are some of the most commonly read texts around the world. Every city has a newspaper, and most articles are written in the exact same way. Let's start with the first skill, brainstorming. On the literacy test, you'll be given a headline and an image. Even if it's not something you would choose to write about, you have to think of a story that makes sense with what you've been given. Your job is to imagine that you've been assigned to write about this event, and so you have to pretend to report on the facts of the story that a newspaper reader would want to know. You'll have space to make rough notes. Use this space. Students who just jump in and start writing can get lost or confused halfway through. If you spend a few minutes coming up with some ideas, the rest of the article will be easier to write. The article's image and headline will give you some of the information that you need for your story. And the whole story must be related to what they give you, so don't drift too far from what would be realistic. A good brainstorming strategy is the 5W plus H. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. Use your creative thinking skills to come up with details for your story. You can make up any names or places that work with the picture. The people who are marking your story just want to read something that makes sense with the picture and headline. If your story is too silly, they will take off marks. So do your best to write a report on this made-up event. As you're brainstorming, think of the people involved in the story you will write. Who would a journalist want to interview? What would that person say? You can use quotes from these witnesses whenever you get stuck for an idea. So your first paragraph should be about 2 to 3 sentences and tell your reader everything they need to know about the event. People who read newspapers want to get their information quickly, so don't waste time with elaborate storytelling. Just get to the facts. Some students write the date in their intro, which doesn't really make sense since newspapers are printed almost every day. If someone is reading a story in the newspaper, the assumption is that the event happened recently. Let's talk about the tone of your writing. Journalists never use words like I, me, or my in the body of their stories. They tell their stories without making reference to themselves. The readers probably don't really care about the opinion of the journalist anyway, so don't use these words. Keep the writing emotionless. This means don't use words like awesome or tragedy. Don't use exclamation points. If it's an emotional story, let the quotes from your witnesses express that emotion. You almost want to try to write the story the way a robot would. Just the facts, just what people need to know. Also, don't use contractions or slang. So instead of writing couldn't, write could not. If you want more practice matching the writing tone of a journalist, just pick up a newspaper and start reading the articles. You'll see the same tone in every front page article. Cold, emotionless, fact-based, formal. Paragraphs in a news article are only a few sentences long. They just look longer because papers put them into narrow columns. So don't feel the need to write on and on. Just a few sentences is good. If you get stuck for ideas, write a short paragraph on any of the ideas you brainstormed in your rough notes. So a short paragraph on who is involved, another short paragraph on what happened, a short paragraph on how it went down. It's always a good idea to include a few quotes from people involved in the story. After you explain who the person is the first time, you can refer to that person by their last name only. Punctuating quotes is a lot easier than you might think. Just remember, punctuation before quotation. You have to introduce a quote with a punctuation mark, a comma, and you have to put the period before the quotation marks at the end of the quote. If you want to identify the speaker of the quote mid-sentence, follow the same rule. Punctuation, quotation. Punctuation, quotation. 2 more things to talk about. Don't leave any blank space. Try to write all the way to the bottom of the page. You don't want to fall short of the 300 out of 400 that you need to pass because you left half a blank page on one of the writing tasks. Also, be sure you reread your work when you're done. The quality of your writing is worth 40 marks for this part of the test. Here's the rubric they use to mark your writing. As you can see, they'll forgive some minor spelling errors if they don't distract from the overall quality of the article. But if you forget entire words, or if your writing is so messy that the person reading it can't figure out what you wrote, you're going to lose out on marks you could have had. Let's review. Brainstorm first, it's time well spent. Write short, emotionless, formal paragraphs that report on the facts of your made-up story. Use quotes from witnesses. Try to use punctuation correctly. If you want to see examples of articles that other students your age have written and what scores they earned, you can always go to eqao.com. If you follow these guidelines, practice writing some articles, and get feedback from the teachers at your school, you'll do just fine on this part of the test.